You can feel it before you can name it. That strange acceleration in the background of your days, like reality, has quietly pressed a fast-forward button that no one announced. Traffic, headlines, moods, global events, everything feels more condensed, more charged, more extreme than it used to. It's as if the volume on existence has been turned up, not just emotionally, but energetically. You sense it when you wake up, before the mind has even started telling its stories. Something is moving. From another angle, it's like standing in a room where the temperature is slowly rising. At first, you barely notice. 1 degree warmer, another. You adapt, shrug it off, keep going. But there comes a point where the air itself starts to feel different on your skin. Heavier, thinner, more intense. You realize you aren't just a person in a room. You're inside a system that's approaching a threshold, and your body knows before your mind admits it. This is one way to understand what people call a quantum event. Not a movie scene with flashing lights in the sky, not a chosen few fantasy, more like water approaching its boiling point. Nothing dramatic for a while, just heat building in invisible ways, molecules vibrating a little faster, then a little faster, and then, in one breathtaking moment, the entire structure flips into something new. Not a hotter version of water, but a different state altogether. You're living in that in-between stage right now, and you can feel it. As the frequency rises, ordinary life starts to behave in unusual ways. Time doesn't feel linear anymore. Days vanish, weeks blur, moments stretch. You walk into a room and forget why. You look up, and hours have passed. Or the opposite happens. Profound experiences seem to occur in minutes, as if something vast has been compressed into a narrow slice of clock time. Your schedule hasn't changed. Your relationship with time has. Notice what this implies. If time feels different, if events cluster together in unlikely patterns, if coincidences stop feeling like coincidences, you might not just be stressed or distracted. You might be experiencing a field, the invisible fabric of reality, as it begins to reorganize. Just as water close to boiling stops behaving like calm liquid, consciousness close to a transition stops behaving like the stable, predictable awareness you were taught to expect. And yet, part of you keeps trying to normalize it. You tell yourself everyone feels this way. You call it burnout, or information overload, or weird luck. You try to explain it using old language for a new phenomenon. Meanwhile, within you, there is a quieter voice that doesn't buy the old explanations anymore. It's the part of you that has noticed how often life now mirrors your inner state with startling speed. You think about someone, they appear. You dread something, it materializes. You practice a tiny shift in attitude, and the world around you tilts in response. Not always, not on command, but often enough that you can no longer write it off as random. In simpler terms, your consciousness is starting to feel like a tuning dial. When you tighten into fear, your world shrinks and hardens. When you soften into presence, your world opens and rearranges. The external environment still matters, but it doesn't feel like the only thing in charge anymore. There is a subtle sense that reality and awareness are in a feedback loop, trading information back and forth. Here's the paradox. From the outside, it still looks like you're living an ordinary life. Same city, same job, same family, same body. But inside, you can sense that the room temperature of Earth consciousness is rising, and you are not just watching, you are participating. Your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, your breath are interacting with a living field that feels more responsive, more sensitive, more alive than anything you were taught about in school. This is where the idea of two Earths becomes more than a metaphor. It doesn't begin with planets literally splitting. It begins in perception. Imagine two people standing in the same street. One feels trapped in a collapsing world. The other feels strangely guided, supported, and invited into something new. Same weather, same economy, same news cycle, completely different realities, because each one is tuned to a different band of experience in the same shared field. You've felt this difference already, when you scroll through the same headlines as everyone else, but react in a way you didn't expect. Where others see only disaster, you feel both concern and a curious sense of inevitability, as if some deeper pattern is unfolding. Where others see only chaos, you sense reorganization. Where others speak only of endings, you keep getting an odd whisper of beginning inside your chest. Which brings us to the core signal: recognition. Not agreement, not belief, recognition. Something in you hears language about a split, about a shift, about a new earth, and instead of dismissing it automatically, you feel an inner click. You may not buy every explanation. You may question every teacher. You may analyze every claim. But beneath the skepticism, there is a felt sense that reality is in fact rearranging at a level deeper than politics, culture, or technology. And somehow, you are directly involved. You are not being asked to accept any doctrine. You are being invited to notice your own experience. Notice how often your inner state seems to modulate what you encounter. Notice how strongly you feel the emotional climate of a room before anyone speaks. Notice how frequently your body reacts to information that your mind hasn't processed yet. Notice how, despite fatigue, a strange anticipation lives underneath everything, as if some part of you has been waiting for this exact era. This first stage is not about predicting dates or labeling yourself as chosen. It's about realizing that Earth is acting like a system near a phase change. The pressure you feel isn't a personal flaw. The acceleration you sense isn't just your schedule. The flickers of impossible timing, odd déjà vu, and sudden inner shifts may be symptoms of a collective consciousness approaching a threshold. You're not late. You're not behind. You're standing at the edge of a transition that is both planetary and intimate. And the fact that you can feel it at all is already part of the story. You've been trained to think of separation in crude, physical terms: lines on a map, fences between properties, bodies walking away from each other. In that model, two realities sounds like a fantasy, because you imagine continents splitting or people vanishing in a flash of special effects. But when you look at it through the lens of energy and information, separation starts long before anything dramatic happens in matter. It begins as a quiet sorting by frequency. Think of a simple radio. Inside, there is one device, one antenna, one physical space, yet hundreds of stations are broadcasting through that same space at the same time. You can't see them, but the room is full of music, voices, and signals. The only thing that determines what you hear is the frequency you tune to. Turn the dial a little, and your whole experience changes, even though the room didn't move and the device didn't teleport. Now imagine Earth as that radio, not in a poetic way, but as a field system that can host multiple bands of experience simultaneously. Human consciousness is the tuning mechanism. When you're locked into fear, rivalry, and rigid certainty, it's like being tuned to a dense, low-frequency station. When you're anchored in presence, compassion, and curiosity, you're receiving a higher band. Same planet, same streets, different broadcasts. As the overall field charges, those stations don't stay as close together as they used to. The difference between one band and another becomes more pronounced. Think of an old record player. If you spin a record at the wrong speed, the song doesn't just sound a bit off. It becomes warped, distorted, almost unrecognizable. Try playing a slow record on a hyper-fast setting, and the music turns into noise. This is what frequency incompatibility is. Not punishment, not reward, just the reality of patterns that can't coexist coherently when the system speeds up. As the turntable of Earth's energy speeds, certain ways of being sync up with the new rotation. They feel increasingly natural, clear, and supported. Other patterns, rigid guilt, chronic victimhood, denial of inner truth, start to drag, grind, and throw sparks. The same behaviors that used to be tolerable now feel unbearable. The same environments that once felt normal begin to feel poisonous to your nervous system. From another angle, you can imagine a pot of water on a stove. While it's heating, liquid and gas are still in relationship. There are bubbles and steam, but it's one pot, one continuous state. Near boiling, though, the system starts to organize around two different attractors, water and vapor. At the exact transition point, you see both at once. Surface tension breaks, droplets fling upward. The structure of the liquid refuses to stay what it was. In that moment, you don't have a moral verdict about which molecule deserved to become steam. You simply see physics. One cluster of molecules locks into the higher energy pattern. Another cluster stays in the lower pattern until it either joins the new state or settles back into cooler liquid. The separation is a natural sorting process based on energy, not worth. You're living in that sorting process right now, and your inner life is the laboratory. Notice the rising tension between the parts of you that are ready to live more honestly and the parts that want to cling to old stories. Notice how quickly you're now shown when something is out of alignment. A job you tolerated for years suddenly becomes intolerable. A relationship dynamic that you used to excuse suddenly makes your whole body contract. It's not that the job or the person changed overnight. The spin sped up, and the mismatch is louder. As the frequency rises, mixed signals become harder to maintain. You can no longer half commit to your values without feeling it physically. You can't keep saying one thing and doing another without life mirroring back that split in painfully clear ways. It's like trying to listen to two radio stations at once. There's only static, fatigue, and confusion. This is where the idea of two Earths stops being a dramatic slogan and starts to look like a natural endpoint of long-term frequency sorting. Over time, consciousness that resonates with cooperation, presence, and coherence is drawn into one attractor field. Consciousness that continues to resonate with separation, scarcity, and chronic conflict gathers in another. Think less planets splitting in half, more streams of water choosing different riverbeds. In simpler terms, the Great Divide isn't fundamentally between believers and non-believers, or spiritual people and non-spiritual people. It's between states of coherence and states of incoherence. In a more coherent state, your thoughts, emotions, and actions line up with what you know to be true in your core. In an incoherent state, you know one thing, say another, and live a third. The more the field accelerates, the harder that double life becomes. Here's the paradox again. From the outside, it might look like everyone is sharing one world. Same sky, same news, same collective events. Yet as sorting continues, you'll notice two broad experiences emerging. For some, life feels like an ever-tightening spiral of crisis, scandal, and exhaustion. For others, it feels like a high-pressure initiation that somehow opens more support, more synchronicity, and more meaningful connection with each passing year. The fork isn't a single date circled on a cosmic calendar. It's a progressive divergence in what different nervous systems can perceive and participate in. At a certain point, the difference becomes so vast that it feels like two realities coexisting side by side. This is the separation people sense. Not a sudden teleportation, but a gradual solidifying of two dominant fields of experience. You don't have to understand every detail of quantum mechanics to feel this. You just have to be honest about your own data. What happens when you act from fear? What happens when you act from presence? Which reality do you enter with each choice? The split is not somewhere out there in the distance. It's already expressing itself in these small, daily crossings between contraction and expansion. The larger bifurcation is simply the accumulation of countless micro-choices in countless lives, sorting consciousness into different bands of experience that eventually feel like entirely different worlds. And in that light, the question stops being, will I be taken to the right Earth someday? And becomes, which broadcast am I strengthening with my state right now? You're not waiting for separation. You're participating in it with every breath. Somewhere along the way, the story got twisted. You heard about a chosen few, about a tiny group being selected by an external force, about gates opening for some and slamming shut for others. In that version, you sit and wait to be picked. You hope you've done enough. You scan your life for spiritual gold stars, wondering if the invisible judges are pleased. The whole thing feels like a cosmic talent show. But if you pay attention to your direct experience, something else emerges. Reality isn't acting like a panel of judges. It's acting like a mirror. From another angle, think of frequency not as a label someone puts on you, but as the music your nervous system is broadcasting at any given moment. When you're steeped in resentment, your body plays one song. When you're settled in gratitude, it plays another. The selection process isn't a mysterious vote happening behind the scenes. It's resonance. Environments, people, and timelines that match your song are drawn in. Those that don't match drift away. This means the idea of 1% works less like a club membership and more like a description of how rare a certain state currently is. If only 1 out of 100 people in a given space is consistently living from coherence, presence, and inner responsibility, then that state will feel like the 1%, not because they're better, but because they're outnumbered by other patterns. Here's the crucial shift. You are not passively waiting to see whether you are one of them. You are actively tuning yourself, moment by moment. In simpler terms, imagine walking through your day with a dimmer switch on your awareness. Each time you choose honesty over self-betrayal, the switch turns a little brighter. Each time you choose curiosity over knee-jerk judgment, a little brighter. Each time you catch yourself spiraling into fear and gently return to your body, your breath, your present sensations, you notch the brightness up again. No one is standing behind you keeping score. The field responds directly to the current setting of that dimmer, not to the story you tell about yourself. As the frequency of Earth rises, these moment-to-moment adjustments have more impact. A small shift in state that used to produce a subtle effect now sends a clear signal. You can see it in how quickly certain paths open when you align with inner truth, and how quickly doors slam shut when you ignore it. Life starts teaching you that your state is the currency that buys you entry into certain experiences. And yet, the mind loves to make it complicated. It wants formulas, guarantees, techniques. It asks, how do I secure my place? How do I make sure I'm in the right group when everything divides? That question comes from the same old paradigm: external judgment, external salvation, external catastrophe. It assumes your power lies in convincing some authority to stamp your cosmic passport, but the mechanics you're living inside point in a different direction. They say, alignment is the passport. Think of free will less as choosing from a menu of physical events and more as choosing which inner state you're willing to inhabit. You don't always control what shows up in your life, but you have growing influence over how you meet it, and how you meet it determines which branch of reality you step onto. When you refuse to numb out, even in discomfort, you're choosing one world. When you engage with your pain instead of projecting it outward as blame, you're choosing one world. When you take responsibility for what you can shift in yourself, rather than trying to control everyone around you, you're choosing one world. Those are frequency choices, not moral votes. They change what you can perceive and participate in. Meanwhile, when you cling to the identity of perpetual victim, insist that nothing can improve until the external world behaves exactly as you demand, and feed narratives that make you powerless, you're also choosing just in the opposite direction. You're aligning with a band of reality where life continually confirms your helplessness, because that's the signal you're broadcasting. Here's the paradox. You can intellectually subscribe to every spiritual idea in existence and still tune to a dense band of experience. You can also question everything, doubt everything, and yet live in a way that is profoundly aligned, honest, and present. The field responds to your actual state, not your labels, not your language, not your self-image. So when you hear about a future event that separates 1% from 99%, you can translate that into something much more immediate and practical. A threshold of coherence that consciousness either stabilizes in or doesn't. It isn't a prize. It's a gear you gradually shift into by living in a way that matches that gear. From another angle, imagine two elevators in the same building. One goes up, one goes sideways. Neither is evil, neither is holy. They simply lead to different floors. Your selection is as simple and as profound as which one you step into each day through the attitudes you rehearse and the choices you embody. This is why small shifts matter so much now. In slower times, you could spend years out of alignment and still feel like life more or less functioned. In accelerated times, misalignment gets amplified. You skip the hard conversation, and the distance in that relationship explodes. You suppress your intuition about a decision, and the fallout arrives in days instead of years. It's not punishment. It's instant feedback in a highly responsive field. You are being invited to treat that feedback as guidance, not condemnation. Which brings us to the question behind all the others. If no one were judging you, if making the cut weren't the point, how would you choose to show up in your own life? What state feels like home in your chest? What version of you feels most honest, even if it scares you? That inner home is the frequency band we're really talking about. The so-called chosen are simply the ones who keep returning to that inner home until it becomes their default. They still wobble, they still forget, they still fall into old patterns. But each time, they remember a little faster. They recover a little more gracefully. They trust the pull of coherence more than the noise of fear. You don't become that 1% by impressing the universe. You become it by no longer abandoning yourself. And in a reality where fields are sorting, that level of self-honesty is the clearest signal you can send. You've probably felt it in your bones long before you read any words about cycles. That subtle sense that history isn't just moving in a straight line, but turning through seasons that are bigger than human lifetimes. Empires rise and fall in patterns. Technologies appear as if on schedule. Crises repeat with new costumes. It's as though Earth is keeping time with a clock you were never taught to see. From another angle, imagine that the planet itself is a traveler moving through a landscape of invisible weather. Not clouds and storms, but bands of radiation, information, and subtle energy that bathe the whole biosphere. As Earth moves, the light it receives from the cosmos changes in quality. Some regions of space have calmer frequencies, others are more intense, like electrical storms of information. You live inside that changing weather. Your nervous system is the antenna. As the planet enters a region of higher intensity light, everything that lives on it has to adapt. Plants adjust their growth patterns. Animals change migration, behavior, even biology over long spans. Human consciousness, wired into the same field, starts to reconfigure its perception and values. What used to feel normal begins to feel too tight. What used to seem impossible starts to feel inevitable. In simpler terms, this is the cosmic clock. Not destiny written in stone, but recurring opportunities built into the structure of the solar system moving through the galaxy. The hands on that clock are not numbers, but levels of pressure. Periods where the background radiation is gentle, and periods where it ramps up and demands evolution. You're alive in one of those ramp-up periods. You can see it in how fast ideas spread now, how quickly outdated systems crack, how intensely the human nervous system is being challenged. Compare the inner life of someone from a few hundred years ago. Small community, limited information, slow change, to the barrage of stimuli you navigate daily. Your brain is processing the equivalent of entire past lifetimes' worth of data in a single decade. And yet, beneath the overload, something else is happening. You're gaining capacities that would have seemed paranormal to earlier generations. Emotional intelligence, intuition, pattern recognition across massive amounts of information, spontaneous empathy that crosses cultures and continents. The cosmic pressure doesn't just break things. It awakens latent abilities that only activate when the light is bright enough. As the frequency rises, outdated structures can't hold. That applies to governments and economies, but it also applies to the private architecture inside you. Beliefs, identities, coping strategies built for a slower, denser world. The cosmic clock is telling you, in its own language, these scaffolds were useful. They're too small now. From another angle, think of a caterpillar inside a chrysalis. It isn't being punished when its old form dissolves. The instructions for becoming a butterfly were in its cells all along, waiting for the right phase. Once that phase begins, the body literally liquefies. To the caterpillar mind, it would probably feel like annihilation. From the perspective of the deeper pattern, its precision, every breakdown is mapped to a breakthrough. This is how cycles operate on planetary scales. Long periods of consolidation, followed by shorter, intense windows where everything seems to fall apart, speed up, or go sideways at once. During those windows, consciousness is given a choice: reorganize at a higher level or cling to the old structure and experience growing distortion. You know you're in such a window because what used to hold you together now often feels like it's tearing you apart. Careers built on compromise become unbearable. Relationships built on pretending become unsustainable. Narratives about who you are, what you deserve, what's possible for your life, start to fray at the edges. It's not that you failed at maintaining them, it's that the cycle has moved on. Here's the paradox. On the surface, this era can look like pure randomness, a string of unrelated crises. But when you feel into it, there's an underlying rhythm. Themes repeat, exposures repeat, opportunities to choose integrity, presence and courage repeat. Every time a system cracks, you're being shown where consciousness outgrew its container. As the cosmic clock advances, the background light doesn't just expose darkness out there. It shines into all the places in you that were easier to ignore in calmer times. Old hurts, long-standing avoidance, embedded fears. The things you could once sidestep now press to the surface. Not because you're broken, but because the new frequency can't carry unresolved density without distortion. From another angle, you can imagine humanity as a single organism moving through developmental stages: childhood, adolescence, adulthood. Each stage has tasks you cannot bypass. At some point, innocence gives way to responsibility. Fantasy gives way to discernment. Avoidance gives way to accountability. You're living through a collective adolescence right now, where the species is being asked to move from reaction to conscious choice. This is where the concept of a future event starts to make more sense. The event isn't an arbitrary test. It's the convergence point in a long arc of cycles where the light, the pressure, and the accumulated choices of billions of lives reach a threshold. Past that threshold, continuing to live as though consciousness is powerless no longer works. Continuing to organize society as though everything is separate no longer works. The cosmic weather simply won't support those stories in the same way. You can already feel how expensive it is, energetically, to pretend you don't know what you know, to drag yourself through environments that your whole body is saying no to live as if your inner state doesn't impact the world around you. Those ways of being used to be normal. Under this level of pressure, they start to feel like wearing 10 layers of clothes in a desert. The clock isn't asking you to become perfect. It's asking you to stop trying to live in a previous season. Which brings us back to you, right here. You don't control the cycle. You don't set the cosmic timing, but you do choose how you meet it. You can treat the rising pressure as evidence that everything is doomed, or as evidence that a deep pattern is insisting on a new level of honesty and coherence. The same light that exposes corruption in institutions is exposing self-betrayal in your everyday choices. The same acceleration that shatters weak structures out there is collapsing the ones inside you that once kept you small. The cosmic clock is not counting down to your judgment, it's counting down to a collective opportunity. The question is not, will this cycle happen? It already is. The question is, who do you become as it completes? By now, you've probably questioned your own sanity more than once. Not because you're losing touch with reality, but because reality doesn't behave the way you were promised it would. Memories that don't match anyone else's, events that shouldn't be possible, happening anyway. A life that feels strangely scripted and improvisational at the same time. If you've been quietly wondering, is it just me? This part is for you. From another angle, think of these anomalies as status messages from your system. They aren't random. They're signals that your consciousness is no longer locked into a narrow band of experience. You're touching the edge of a different operating system, and the cracks in the old one show up as glitches. One of the clearest signals is timeline fluidity. You notice that the past has become strangely soft. You remember a detail one way, and someone else remembers it another. You're sure an object used to sit in one place, yet now it has always been somewhere else. You recall a conversation that left a deep emotional imprint, but there's no proof it happened. For a while, you might diagnose this as faulty memory, stress, or distraction. As the frequency rises, though, you start to see a pattern. The shifts are not random. They cluster around turning points, decisions, and moments of deep emotional charge. It's as if your consciousness has been quietly testing multiple branches of your storyline, then settling on the one that matches your current state. You're not just remembering, you're feeling echoes of timelines you nearly stepped into. In simpler terms, reality begins to behave less like a single fixed movie and more like a set of alternate edits. Your awareness is learning to sense the cut points, Another signal is what you could call reality customization. You look around and realize your personal life does not resemble the consensus story. While many people you know are drowning in the same patterns year after year, you keep accidentally ending up in spaces, relationships, and opportunities that reflect inner work you never announced to anyone. Your outer world seems to rearrange itself in sync with your inner shifts. You might notice that when you let go of a painful self-image, circumstances that matched it rapidly fall apart. When you commit to a healthier pattern, support appears from places that make no logical sense. It's not that you control everything, but life responds to your state with a speed and precision that feels nothing like the slow cause and effect you were taught in school. Here's the paradox. Everyone is living in the same era, yet your version of this era feels increasingly personal, tailored to your specific growth edge. That's what it looks like when you begin to co-author your reality with the field. Then there is the phenomenon of bleed-through. You catch glimpses of something behind the physical layer, patterns in the air when you close your eyes, flickers of light at the edge of your vision, a presence in a room that no one else comments on, but your body reacts to as if someone just walked in. Dreams spill into waking life with symbols so precise they feel less like imagination and more like communication. In denser times, you might have shoved all of this under the label weird and moved on. In accelerated times, you can't ignore the consistency. The same symbol follows you through dreams, conversations, and random signs on the street. The same numbers appear at critical moments. The same inner nudge proves accurate far too often to be dismissed as coincidence. Meanwhile, another signal emerges, deep memory that doesn't belong to your personal biography. You find yourself knowing things you never studied, feeling oriented to places you've never visited, drawn to roles you never planned for. It can feel like nostalgia for a life you haven't lived, or grief for a story that hasn't happened yet. You might sit with someone and sense an ancient familiarity that has nothing to do with your shared past in this lifetime. From another angle, this is your access to the wider archive of consciousness opening. As the frequency rises, the walls between your current identity and the larger field of experience become thinner. Instead of amnesia, you get flashes of a bigger context. Not as fantasy to escape into, but as a backdrop that explains why certain themes keep repeating in your life with such intensity. Then there's the amplification of energy sensitivity. Rooms speak before people do. You walk into a space and immediately feel the residue of arguments, tenderness, or grief. Your body tightens around certain news stories, not because of the information, but because of the frequency behind how it's being transmitted. You feel drained around some people and inexplicably energized around others, regardless of what is being said. At first, you might resent this sensitivity. It seems to make life harder. Over time, you realize it's a navigation system. Your body is mapping the field for you in real time, telling you where your frequency is supported and where it's distorted. The more you listen, the more your path curves toward coherence. Relationship reorganization is another unmistakable sign. People you've known for years suddenly feel like characters from a past life. You care about them, but you can no longer plug into the same conversations, the same dramas, the same shared illusions. You try to go back to how it was, and the connection feels like forcing a puzzle piece into the wrong picture. At the same time, new people arrive and click into place almost instantly. You recognize each other beyond story and surface. The sense of, "I've known you forever," is not poetic. It is a frequency recognition. Your fields harmonize because you're standing on similar ground internally, even if your external histories are wildly different. And beneath all of this, perhaps the most persistent signal of all, a pull you can't name, a sense that you are meant to be part of something larger than your individual storyline, that you came here for more than survival and repetition, that this particular moment in history is not random for you. You may not know what your role is, you may doubt you're ready, but the feeling doesn't leave. It wakes up with you, it goes to sleep with you, it stands quietly behind every choice you make. Which brings us to the strangest signal, the one that ties all the others together. You are here, listening to this, and it doesn't feel like entertainment. It feels like someone describing the shape of your inner life back to you in a language you didn't know you needed until now. These are not badges to collect or tests to pass. They are mile markers on a road you've already been walking. They don't prove you're better than anyone. They suggest you're tuned to a band of reality where the transition is already underway. Your job is not to manufacture these signals or compare how many you have to someone else. Your job is to acknowledge the ones that are genuinely present. Let them reassure you that you're not imagining the shift, and let that reassurance soften the fear that you're getting it wrong. You're not broken. You're receiving a different broadcast. If you strip away the mystic language for a moment, what you're really dealing with is a question of how reality organizes itself around observation. You were taught that there is one solid world out there, and that everyone is walking around inside the same fixed environment. Differences in experience, you were told, are mostly about perception and opinion. But your life keeps breaking that rule. Two people go through the same event. One is shattered, one is transformed. Same circumstances, completely different worlds. From another angle, imagine reality as a vast ocean of possibility, and your consciousness as a lens that pulls one pattern into focus out of countless options. You're not creating the ocean. You're choosing which wave becomes your shoreline. Every observation, every assumption, every expectation is like a setting on that lens. Shift the setting, and the same objective world rearranges into a different subjective experience. This is where the idea of many worlds stops being just a physics theory and starts to feel personal. One way of understanding it is this: every time a situation could go in more than one direction, the deeper fabric of reality branches. One version of you walks left, another version walks right. One version stays, another version leaves. You don't consciously track all those branches, but they exist as potential structures in the field. Most of the time, your awareness locks onto one branch and follows it, assuming it's the only one. As the frequency rises, that lock loosens. You begin to sense the presence of other paths. You feel the weight of choices you almost made. You experience the uncanny sense that you've been here before, in a place you've never visited, because some version of you walked that path in another branch. In simpler terms, you're starting to feel that the movie of your life has alternate timelines running in parallel, and your state determines which one becomes vivid. Now scale that up to a planet. Billions of lenses, billions of observation streams, billions of subtle choices about what to notice, what to believe, what to fear, what to trust. All of that feeds into which branch of the Earth story becomes dominant for different groups of people. You can think of third-dimensional Earth as the branch where consciousness insists on separation, linear time, and dense cause and effect. In that reality, everything is heavy, slow, and apparently solid. Change is hard. Miracles are rare. Life feels like pushing a boulder uphill. Quantum Earth, or a fifth-dimensional expression, is another branch where consciousness recognizes itself as participatory. In that reality, time is more flexible, matter is more responsive. Synchronicities are not rare events, they are a language. Life feels less like pushing and more like surfing a wave you're in honest relationship with. Here's the paradox: both branches exist in the same physical coordinates. You can have two people living in the same building, on the same street, with the same access to outer resources, yet they inhabit radically different versions of Earth. One experiences those years as an extended crisis. The other experiences them as an accelerated awakening. The difference is not that one is delusional and the other is enlightened. The difference is which set of rules their consciousness is playing by. On the denser branch, the rules are strict. Reality is fixed. The past dictates the future. You are a separate unit trying to survive against other units. If you can't see a solution with your senses, it doesn't exist. On the quantum branch, the rules feel very different. Reality is responsive. The future can inform the present. You are a localized expression of a larger field. Solutions often appear after you move in trust, not before. As the field intensifies, hopping between branches becomes more obvious. Think of it like switching TV channels. Same screen, different programs. When you give your attention to fear, you tune into a channel where events line up to confirm that fear. When you ground yourself in presence and responsibility, you tune into a different broadcast, where events line up to confirm that stance. You've already noticed how small shifts in state can flip you from one channel to another. A day that starts in panic feels like one timeline. A single moment of deep honesty, a real conversation, or a surrender into what is, can suddenly open a completely different day, even though the clock and the calendar haven't changed. From another angle, you could say the split between Earths is the point where these channels drift so far apart that they no longer resemble each other. On one, systems built on fear and control double down. On the other, entirely new ways of living emerge that don't make sense to the old paradigm because they're based on cooperation with the field instead of domination of it. You're not being dragged to one or the other against your will. You're training your tuner through how you show up. When you practice stillness, you make it easier to perceive subtle guidance. When you tell the truth, even when it costs you in the short term, you align with a branch where that truth supports you in the long term. When you stop outsourcing your authority and start listening deeply to your own direct knowing, you step onto a timeline where that kind of sovereignty is normal instead of rebellious. Quantum Earth, in this sense, is not a distant destination. It's a layer that has always been present, like a higher channel that most of humanity's tuners weren't calibrated to receive. The current acceleration is not creating it, it's simply bringing more people into resonance with it at once. That's why your life can feel so wildly out of sync with the dominant narrative. You're picking up a broadcast that many around you can't hear yet. You see possibility where they see only dead ends. You feel meaning where they feel only chaos. You sense an intelligence working through events that others view as random cruelty. This doesn't make you superior, it makes you responsible. Responsible for which channel you feed with your attention. Responsible for which rules you reinforce by how you live. Responsible for recognizing that every time you choose presence over panic, you're not just soothing yourself, you're helping to stabilize an entire band of reality where that choice becomes easier for others. You are not only watching Quantum Earth come online, you are part of the mechanism by which it becomes more real. There's a phase in this transition that almost no one prepares you for. Not the thrill of first awakening, not the relief of stabilization, the part in between. The part where the old world doesn't fit anymore and the new one hasn't fully formed. Where you can't go back, but you don't yet know how to go forward. If you feel like you're living in that hallway, you're not alone. From another angle, imagine you've stepped out of a familiar house into a fog. You can no longer see the rooms you used to inhabit, the roles, identities, habits that defined you. But you also can't yet see the destination. You just know you couldn't stay where you were. You're standing in the doorway between realities, with the ground shifting under your feet. This is the between space. In the between space, the tools you used to rely on often stop working. Motivational tricks that used to get you moving fall flat. Old ways of soothing yourself no longer soothe. Even your spiritual practices can feel strangely hollow at times, like you're repeating gestures that once opened the door, but the key no longer fits the lock. Your mind tries to diagnose this as failure. I'm backsliding. I'm blocked. I must have done something wrong. But if you step back from the panic, you'll notice a deeper pattern. The things that are dissolving are the parts of you built for the old earth. Identities rooted in pleasing others, survival strategies based on suppression, success definitions that required you to abandon your own truth. They're not breaking because you're failing. They're breaking because they can't operate in a more coherent field. From another angle, think of a software upgrade. The new operating system has different requirements. Some of your old apps can't run on it. They crash, freeze, or cause glitches. You can keep trying to force them to work, or you can accept that they belong to a previous framework. The between space is that awkward period where the new system is installed, but you haven't finished replacing the incompatible programs. Emotionally, this can feel like a prolonged death and rebirth. You might wake up feeling like a stranger in your own life. Passions that once lit you up feel dim. Goals that used to drive you now seem irrelevant or even absurd. The you that knew how to function in third-dimensional patterns doesn't know what to do anymore because their job is ending. Here's the paradox. This inner disorientation is often a sign of progress, not regression. You're not losing your center, you're losing the mask you thought was your center. As the frequency increases, pretense becomes unbearable. You can no longer tolerate conversations where you pretend to be smaller than you are. You can no longer stomach work that requires you to betray your values. You can no longer maintain relationships that demand you disconnect from your own knowing. In the between space, saying yes when you mean no hurts more than ever. Forcing yourself to fit where you don't belong feels like wearing clothes 2 sizes too small. The discomfort that used to be mild background noise becomes sharp and undeniable. And yet, you may not know what to say yes to instead. That's the gap that terrifies the mind. This is where surrender changes shape. It's not about passively giving up on life. It's about releasing your right to control the timeline of your transformation. You might find whole areas of your life going offline at once. Career, relationships, living situation, self-image. The mind tries to juggle it all, to set up new structures quickly, to replace the old scaffolding with new ones before the dust settles. The field often says, "Not yet. First we clear, then we build." From another angle, your consciousness is like a house being rewired. Old cables are being pulled out, new circuits are being installed. In the middle, lights flicker. Some rooms lose power, others blaze too bright. If you judge the renovation in that moment, you'll decide the house is broken. If you understand the process, you'll see that this mess is temporary and necessary. The between space also challenges your relationships. People who knew you in your previous phase may not understand what's happening. They might urge you to go back to your old self, not because they wish you harm, but because your transformation confronts their comfort. Meanwhile, you may feel an aching loneliness even when surrounded by others, because your inner landscape no longer matches the world you built around your former identity. Then, almost mysteriously, new connections begin to appear. A conversation with a stranger feels more real than a decade with someone you've known. You stumble onto teachings, art, or communities that speak directly to your current state. You find language for experiences you thought you were the only one having. These are bridge points, small stabilizing islands in the fog. Here's something important. The between space is not a punishment for being almost there. It is a necessary vibrational detox. Anything in you that cannot travel to the new frequency rises to the surface here. Old grief, stored fear, long-hidden resentment, stories about your worth. They're not appearing to torment you, but to be seen, felt, and released. Not all at once, but in waves you can actually integrate. Your task is not to rush through this hallway. Your task is to stay present in it. When your mind demands clarity, you can offer it honesty instead. I don't know who I'm becoming yet, but I know who I can't pretend to be anymore. When fear says, "You're losing everything," you can answer, "I'm losing what can't come with me." When exhaustion says, "Stop trying to grow," you can respond, "I'm not trying to grow. I'm letting go of what blocks growth that's already happening." In quieter moments, you may notice something underneath the turbulence, a subtle steadiness, a center that wasn't accessible in your old life. Even as identities die, something deeper in you feels more alive. Even as structures fall, some part of you knows you're being moved toward truer ground. That deeper knowing is the compass of the between space. You don't have to like this phase. You don't have to understand it. You only have to keep choosing not to abandon yourself inside it. Because, on the other side of this hallway, there is a version of you who remembers this period as the time when everything false fell away and the real life began. By now you've seen that this shift isn't just about big ideas. It's about what you actually do with your attention at 7 a.m. when your mind is racing, or at midnight when your chest is tight, or in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday when you feel the old world tugging you back. If there really are different bands of earth forming, the way you stand, breathe, and choose in those moments is what decides which one you inhabit. From another angle, think of your frequency as the climate inside your body. Weather outside shifts constantly. News, other people's moods, random events. The inner climate is what you can train. You can't control every storm, but you can learn how quickly you come back to clear air after it passes. Stabilizing in a higher band of reality is less about never being triggered and more about how you move through those triggers. The first key is releasing density. Not by bypassing it, not by thinking positive, but by letting what's heavy actually move. When anger, grief, or fear rises, your old pattern might be to shove it down, distract yourself, or dress it up in a spiritual story. In a more coherent field, that doesn't work. The energy just recycles and gets louder. Stabilization begins when you treat dense emotion like weather passing through the sky of your awareness. You feel it in the body, the tight jaw, the hot chest, the shaking hands, and you allow it to complete its cycle without building a narrative around it. A few conscious breaths, a hand on your heart, a willingness to feel the raw sensation without adding, "This means I'm failing," can discharge remarkable amounts of weight. The second key is loosening your grip on linear time. Third-dimensional thinking says, "What happened in the past traps me. What I fear in the future rules me." Higher frequency perception says, "Only what I am embodying now has power." You're not asked to deny your history or ignore practical planning. You're asked to notice how often you leave the present moment to rehearse pain or catastrophe. A simple practice. Several times a day, catch yourself mid-worry and ask, what is actually happening in this exact second? Usually, you're in a room. There is air in your lungs. There is no lion chasing you. That micro reset brings your awareness back to the only place where you can shift timelines, the present. The third key is energetic sovereignty. On the old earth, you might have lived as if everyone else's opinion decides your worth, and external systems dictate your fate. On quantum earth, that stance drains you instantly. Sovereignty doesn't mean isolation or rebellion against everything. It means you recognize that your inner yes and inner no matter more than any script handed to you. Practically, this looks like pausing before big and small decisions and asking, if no one else had an opinion, what would feel true? You may still choose the same action, but the place you act from changes. Over time, this rewires your field from "life happens to me" to "I participate in creating how life feels for me." The fourth key is embracing paradox. Higher frequency reality doesn't fit neatly into either divided by or boxes. You can be scared and guided at the same time. Something can be falling apart and falling into place simultaneously. The old mind wants one clear label: good or bad, success or failure. When it doesn't get that, it panics. Stabilization means practicing both can be true. I feel lost, and something deeper in me feels on track. I don't know what's happening, and I know I'm supposed to be here. Ole. Each time you allow two apparently opposite truths to coexist without forcing a verdict, you expand your capacity to live in a reality where time loops, cause and effect blur, and growth often hides inside endings. The fifth key is following frequency over form. Old patterns choose based on appearances, money, status, other people's approval. Quantum Earth asks, how does this option feel in your body? Does it expand your chest or collapse it? Does it make your breath deeper or shallower? The option that looks best on paper might feel dead. The option that scares your mind might feel strangely alive. You won't always be able to pick the expansive choice immediately. Responsibilities exist, but every time you have a real option, and you choose the path that feels more honest and alive rather than the one that simply looks safer, you align with a timeline where your outer life gradually reorganizes around that authenticity. The sixth key is dissolving the illusion of absolute separation. You still have boundaries, you still have a unique self, but you begin to experience other people less as opponents or props, and more as mirrors and companions in one shared field. Their fear isn't yours to carry, but it also isn't fundamentally different from your own. Their success isn't a threat to you, it's proof that certain possibilities are active in the field. Practically, this shows up when conflict arises. Instead of immediately making the other person wrong, you first ask, what in me is being reflected or triggered here? You might still set firm limits, walk away, or say no, but you do it from a recognition that the same consciousness lives behind both sets of eyes. That recognition stabilizes you in a band of reality where solutions that serve more than just your ego appear. The seventh key is becoming comfortable with not knowing. The old paradigm worships certainty. It wants detailed maps, 5-year plans, guarantees. In accelerated times, those maps crumble faster than you can draw them. The more you cling to them, the more anxious you become. Quantum Earth requires a different skill, moving with partial information. This isn't fatalism, it's intimate collaboration with a living field. You act on the clarity you have right now, the one next step, the one conversation, the one honest admission, and allow the next piece to reveal itself. You stop demanding the whole staircase before taking the first step. Over time, you discover that the path does appear under your feet, but only at the pace your nervous system can handle. Taken together, these keys aren't a checklist to complete. They're postures you return to again and again. Some days you'll release density with grace, and time will feel spacious. Other days you'll get caught in old loops, numb out, or grasp for control. Stabilization doesn't mean you never wobble. It means you recognize the wobble faster, remember the keys sooner, and choose to realign rather than spiraling deeper into self-judgment. Every small act of honesty, every breath that meets feeling instead of avoiding it, every moment you say, "I don't know, but I'm willing to trust the deeper movement," teaches your system how to live in the new band. And that, more than any grand gesture, is how you become someone who doesn't just visit quantum Earth in peak moments. You live there. You've felt this in miniature inside your own life. One brave decision changes everything downstream. You choose honesty in one relationship, and suddenly other relationships begin to rearrange. You change the way you talk to yourself, and your body responds in ways no doctor predicted. A single shift in your inner pattern ripples outward into your circumstances. Now zoom out. Imagine that same principle applied to a species. From another angle, think of humanity as a single nervous system spread across billions of bodies. Each person is like a neuron, firing thoughts, emotions, and choices into the collective field. Most days, it feels like noise, random signals firing in all directions. But when enough neurons start firing in a similar pattern, something different happens. A new capacity emerges in the whole brain. This is how thresholds work in complex systems. There's a point where a few people doing a strange new thing becomes the way things are now. You see this in culture all the time. For years, almost no one does a certain behavior. A handful of early adopters start. They look eccentric, fringe, sometimes foolish. Then, once a critical mass engages that behavior, it suddenly becomes obvious, normal, even inevitable. What was once weird becomes how we live. This is why that phrase, 1%, keeps surfacing, not as a spiritual hierarchy, but as a tipping point. In many systems, you don't need 51% to shift the whole. You need a small but stable minority holding a new pattern long enough and consistently enough that the rest of the system starts to entrain to it. It's like a choir. A few strong voices on key can pull a wavering crowd into harmony, not by overpowering anyone, but by offering a clear reference tone. Right now, you are part of that reference tone. When you choose presence instead of panic, you're not just improving your own day. You're adding one more coherent signal to a field overwhelmed by scattered fear. When you practice seeing others as extensions of the same consciousness instead of enemies or resources, you are quietly undermining the old story of separation at its roots. From another angle, imagine an invisible grid around the planet, not a conspiracy map, but a network of human hearts and minds that have begun to resonate with a different way of being. Every time one of those hearts chooses alignment over self-betrayal, the grid brightens. Every time one of those minds questions a fear story and chooses a more honest perspective, the grid stabilizes. The more stable that grid becomes, the easier it is for others to tune into it. This is the essence of morphic resonance. Once a pattern is established strongly enough in a field, it becomes easier for others to adopt, even if they've never met you, never watched this, never heard about any of these concepts. They simply feel pulled toward new behaviors, new insights, new ways of relating that just make sense now, in a way they didn't 10 years ago. This is the quiet revolution you're part of. Here's the paradox. You may feel more isolated than ever. Your family might not understand your choices. Your old friends might think you've changed too much. In some rooms, you might still be the only one talking about inner responsibility, about frequency, about listening to the body's intelligence. Yet globally, you are less alone than you have ever been. Millions of people are having versions of this same conversation, feeling these same shifts, making these same difficult choices, leaving jobs that don't fit, ending dynamics that drain them, refusing to participate in narratives of pure doom. Many of them will never use the words quantum or dimension. They don't need to. Their nervous systems are voting with their lives. As more of you stabilize in this different posture, something subtle but immense starts to happen. The story of what it means to be human begins to change. Not in manifestos or headlines at first, but in the actual lived expectations people carry. Children are raised by parents who value presence over performance. Communities organize around cooperation instead of rivalry. Workplaces experiment with trust instead of pure control. You won't see all of this on the news. You'll see it in the small, quiet ways reality feels different than the story being sold. In this context, the 99% are not the ones who fail. They are the rest of the nervous system watching those early neurons fire in a new pattern, deciding how much they're willing to change. Some will take longer, some will never choose this route in this lifetime. That doesn't make them lesser, it makes their path different. Your role isn't to drag anyone across an invisible line. Your role is to hold your frequency so steadily that those who are ready can recognize themselves in you. To embody a possibility so clearly that it stops being theory and becomes lived evidence. To be one of the reference tones that makes it easier for others to find their pitch amid the chaos. From another angle, think of a flock of birds changing direction mid-flight. Scientists call it critical mass and local rules. Each bird isn't tracking the entire flock. It's tracking a few neighbors. When enough birds shift, the rest follow because their local reality has changed. You don't have to wake up the entire planet. You meet the people right around you with as much coherence as you can and trust that the pattern will ripple. This is the collective cascade. At a certain point, the accumulation of your private choices, your late-night realizations, your uncomfortable conversations, your quiet acts of courage, crosses an invisible threshold. The field tips. New ways of being suddenly become easier, even for those who never consciously chose them. Old structures collapse faster, not just because they are corrupted, but because there is finally enough coherent alternative in the field to support their replacement. You are not waiting for that tipping point. You are helping to build it, breath by breath. And when enough of you stabilize in this new band, the phrase quantum Earth will stop sounding like an exotic destination. It will describe the simple, lived reality of a species that finally realized, when a small percentage fully commits to a higher pattern, the whole organism gets the chance to evolve. Living on quantum Earth doesn't mean waking up to a life of constant fireworks. It means waking up to a different baseline, a different set of assumptions quietly running in the background of your nervous system. The drama may still appear, the challenges may still come, but the way you relate to them changes so fundamentally that it feels like you're walking through a familiar landscape with completely new gravity. From another angle, imagine you've been playing a game your whole life without knowing the rules. You've been reacting to pieces on the board, trying to protect what you have, trying to win according to goals someone else handed you. Then one day, the rulebook updates inside you. You see that the game isn't about accumulating pieces, it's about learning how your moves shape the board itself. On quantum Earth, that's the shift. You stop living as a pawn and start realizing you are also the player. Practically, this shows up first in how you experience time. Days no longer feel like a straight line you're being dragged along. They feel more like a series of meaningful pockets. You find yourself in deep presence more often, mid-conversation, mid-laugh, mid-tears, and those moments stretch. At the same time, things that no longer serve you can vanish quickly from your life, almost as if the universe is no longer interested in wasting time holding up expired storylines. Synchronicity becomes less of a party trick and more of a language. You think about a shift, and the next podcast you stumble on speaks directly to it. You decide to heal a pattern, and the perfect teacher appears without you hunting. You choose to rest instead of forcing productivity, and the thing you thought you'd miss out on either moves to meet you or reveals itself as unnecessary. You stop saying, "What a crazy coincidence," and start saying, "Of course it showed up that way," not with entitlement, but with quiet recognition that your inner work and the outer field are in ongoing conversation. Fear doesn't disappear, but its role changes. In the old band, fear felt like a verdict. This is dangerous. This is wrong. This is impossible. It froze you, trapped you, or pushed you into frantic action. On quantum Earth, Fear is more like a weather alert. A front is moving through. Pay attention. You learn to sit with the rising sensation, listen to what it's pointing at, and choose from a deeper place instead of letting it drive the car. Sometimes fear signals real boundaries that need to be honored. Sometimes it signals an old narrative that is being questioned. You no longer assume fear equals truth. You treat it as data in a larger system. Relationships shift into a different quality. Connections rooted in convenience, obligation, or mutual avoidance naturally fade. It's not that you become ruthless. It's that your field can't sustain prolonged entanglement with dynamics that require you to be half present. People who insist on playing only by old rules may drift from your daily life, even if you still love them from afar. In their place, connections arrive that feel startlingly clean. You meet people with whom you can be honest without rehearsing. You share your inner life without needing to edit it for palatability. You feel safe saying, "I don't know," and "I was wrong," and "This is what's real for me now," because the relationship isn't built on maintaining an image. It's built on mutual recognition. Conflict still happens, but it carries a different flavor. Instead of warfare, it feels more like recalibration. You may still raise your voice, still cry, still trigger each other, but underneath, there's a shared commitment to truth over winning. The question shifts from, "How do I prove I'm right?" to, "What wants to become clearer between us?" Work and creativity transform as well. You may stay in the same job or field, but the way you move through it changes. You stop seeing your role as just a means to pay bills and start treating it as a channel through which the field expresses. Tasks that once felt meaningless either fall away or get infused with intention. You care less about external markers of success and more about whether what you're doing feels aligned, alive, and useful. You also notice that forcing outcomes becomes increasingly ineffective. Pushing when the energy isn't there, hustling to prove your worth, chasing validation, all of that begins to produce diminishing returns. Meanwhile, the projects, conversations, and actions that feel genuinely resonant tend to unfold with surprising support, as if life itself is invested in them. From another angle, you start to live as though you're in partnership with something larger. Call it the field, the intelligence of life, your deeper self. The name matters less than the felt sense of collaboration. You bring courage, honesty, and willingness. It brings timing, connections, and opportunities you couldn't choreograph. Perhaps the most profound shift is how you understand identity. You still have a personality. You still have preferences, quirks, stories, but they're no longer the prison they once were. You experience yourself more like a focal point of awareness moving through different roles rather than a fixed character trapped in one script. When something ends, a relationship, a job, an entire phase of your life, it hurts, but the hurt happens in a bigger sky. You grieve, and at the same time, you sense that nothing real can be lost. The form changes, the underlying connection, lesson, or essence continues in another configuration. You also become more playful with your own story. You notice how quickly you can shift moods by changing what you emphasize in your inner narration. You stop telling yourself, "Everything is falling apart," and start experimenting with, "Everything is rearranging around a truer version of me." That one shift in framing doesn't magically fix circumstances, but it radically alters how you meet them, and that, in turn, alters what becomes possible. Living on quantum Earth does not mean you float above the world's pain. You still feel grief when systems harm people. You still ache when the planet is disrespected. You still care deeply about justice and healing. The difference is, you no longer experience yourself as an overwhelmed spectator. You recognize that every act of coherence you embody is a contribution to a field that quietly supports better outcomes. You might still protest, still vote, still work in systems that need change, but you do so from a place that remembers the outer structures are reflections of inner patterns in the collective, and you are actively helping to rewrite those patterns just by how you live. Day by day, this becomes less of a philosophy and more of a lived fact. You watch your world respond to your baseline with increasing clarity. You see how quickly you slip into heavier timelines when you abandon yourself, You notice how doors open when you choose integrity over convenience. Eventually, there comes a moment, not dramatic, often very ordinary, when you realize, I'm not visiting this state anymore. This is where I live now. Third-dimensional consciousness becomes something you can remember, but no longer inhabit as your home. Fear still knocks, old habits still whisper, but the gravity has reversed. Your resting place is different. This is life on quantum Earth, not a fantasy escape, but a deeper engagement with reality itself, in which you and the world are no longer on opposite sides of the glass. You are co-creating, learning, and evolving together in real time. And from here, the future event people speak of is not something you're waiting for. It's something you're already embodying, one honest breath at a time. At some point, the language falls away. Dimensions, timelines, quantum Earth. They're useful maps, but they are not the territory. The real shift is much simpler and closer than all of those words suggest. It's how you treat yourself in the smallest moments. It's how you meet your own experience when no one else is watching. You don't have to hold the whole cosmology in your head. You don't have to remember every metaphor or master every concept. What matters is whether you remember, even briefly, that you have a choice in how you show up right now. From another angle, everything you've heard can be distilled into one living question. Does this way of being move me toward coherence, or away from it? Coherence feels like honesty in your chest, like your thoughts, words, and actions lining up as best they can, like the relief of not pretending, even if the truth is, I'm scared, or I don't know, or something in me is changing and I can't explain it yet. Incoherence feels like forcing, like nodding yes while your body screams no, like bending yourself into shapes to fit stories that your deeper self has already outgrown. You don't need to be perfect at choosing coherence. No one is. You only need to notice when you've drifted and gently guide yourself back. That guidance might be as simple as one conscious breath, one hand resting on your heart, one honest sentence spoken out loud instead of swallowed. If you take anything from this transmission, let it be permission. Permission to trust your direct experience, even when it doesn't match the old rules. Permission to honor the signals your body sends, even when others don't see what you see. Permission to release the identities, roles, and timelines that are clearly complete, even if you don't know what comes next. The selection isn't a distant cosmic exam. It's this quiet, repeating moment where you decide whether to stay loyal to a shrinking version of yourself or to the deeper truth that keeps knocking on your awareness. Every time you choose the deeper truth, no matter how small the action, you're voting for the earth you want to live on. If parts of this felt like recognition rather than new information, that's not an accident. Something in you already knows how to walk this. These words are just a mirror held up to a path you've been on for a long time. When you're ready, you don't need to announce it. You don't need to prove it. You only need to keep meeting your own life as if your state matters, because it does. The rest of the journey, the outer confirmations and inner breakthroughs, will unfold at the pace your system can lovingly sustain.